it is somewhat ironic because I mentioned before that I did a lot of work in Brazil that has similar overtones, where even though many on the American right won't agree with my perspective, what actually happened was in 2014 in Brazil, the Workers' Party, which is actually a center-left party, it's not a communist party, of Lula da Silva. Lula governed Brazil from 2002 to 2010. I've talked about this before. He didn't turn it into Venezuela or Cuba. Brazil had massive economic growth under Lula's presidency. Whether it's because of stuff he did or not, it's nonetheless the case that Brazil became the 6th largest economy in the world. They surpassed the UK and other countries that have long been, quote, part of the developed world. There was no communism of any kind. But it's a center-left party. You can call it a left-wing party if you really feel like it. But it won legitimately in 2002, 2006, and 2010. And the establishment in Brazil, and especially the center-right in Brazil, were desperate to finally defeat the Workers' Party at the polls. They couldn't do it. They tried 3 elections in a row and they got crushed. Whatever else you want to say about him, Lula is a spectacularly talented politician. So leading up to 2014, where they had won 3 times in a row, they were sure that they finally found the way to win. Lula won in 2002 and 2006. He then chose as a handpicked successor a not very charismatic, kind of bureaucrat, technocrat, Dilma Rousseff. She was a radical when she was younger. She picked up arms and went to prison, fighting against the military dictatorship in Brazil, where she was tortured in prison. But in her adult life, she became this kind of very technocratic figure. She was never ran for office previously. She didn't really have a lot of political talent. But he handpicked her, and based on his popularity when he left office, 86%, she won that election pretty easily. She's now the president of the BRICS Bank in China, where she was picked by President Lula. But anyway, in 2014, they thought finally they had their candidate, this kind of very charismatic playboy who was part of a very rich and politically well-known family, who had some charisma. Most of these center-right kind of politicians in Brazil, like in the US, are kind of Jeb Bush types. Just no one likes them. They don't excite anybody. They're just pro-bankers. So they had this candidate, Aécio Neves, who they were convinced was finally going to win. And it was a very tightly contested election, viciously contested. And Dilma, in the Workers' Party, won by a tiny amount, by less than 2 points, I believe. And they just never accepted, the establishment never accepted, the center-right never accepted that defeat. And so they thought, you know what, we're never going to be able to beat the Workers' Party fair and square. And so in 2016, they concocted the dumbest and most trivial claims possible to impeach her, which they were able to do because the economy was plummeting. She was extremely unpopular by that point. And ultimately, impeachment is just a political act. But the charges against her were more trivial than even this prosecution against Trump. They impeached her, removed her from office, installed in her place the center-right kind of establishment vice president that she had selected as part of the coalition politics Brazil does. And then, because of his unpopularity, he literally had 5% approval. Lula announced that he was gearing up to run again in 2018, and polls showed he was clearly the front runner. He had the most name recognition, by far the most popular candidate running. Bolsonaro was in second, but for a long time, no one believed, even Bolsonaro supporters, that he was going to be able to win. Polls were showing him 15, 20 points behind Lula, and then a corrupt prosecutor whacking on behalf of the establishment media, Globo and the other establishment media, propped up this prosecutor into a national hero of the kind that Democrats did, like with Robert Mueller, and he indicted and then convicted Lula and rendered him ineligible to run for president in 2018. And as a result, that was when Bolsonaro won. Now, the establishment did not want Bolsonaro. They hated Bolsonaro before the election and after. The Brazilian establishment hates Bolsonaro the way the American establishment hates Trump. They kind of created their own monster. What they really thought they were going to achieve was by making Lula ineligible. They never thought Bolsonaro would win. Just like nobody thought when Trump ran that that he was going to win. Remember, they would all laugh at Ann Coulter or Keith Ellison or anybody who said Trump had a chance to win. They thought it was absurd because by the rules of their game that they thought they owned and controlled, Trump had no chance. No one thought Bolsonaro was going to win in the establishment. They thought they were opening up the chance for a center-right kind of Mitch McConnell type to finally win. And instead they got Bolsonaro because everybody hates the establishment in Brazil, the center-right and the center-left. But the way they achieved that was by putting Lula in prison, and the journalism we did exposed that the prosecutors cheated. A lot of people still think Lula is a criminal. But be that as it may, the prosecutor and the judge cheated, they colluded, and the goal of the establishment was to remove Lula through convicting him and abusing the legal process in order to prevent him from re-winning or getting reelected in 2018. Once his conviction was nullified and he was rendered eligible, he ran again in 2022, and he did win by a tiny percentage over Bolsonaro, who had all the same obstacles I talked about earlier that Trump faced when he ran, including COVID, the economic damage from that, and the establishment aligned against him. So it's a very similar pattern. And it's the use of lawfare in Brazil to remove Lula from the race in order to render him ineligible because they were afraid they couldn't beat him, and they ended up being right. They couldn't beat him. And that's exactly what is being done here. This is a joke of a case. It is, I think, going to help Trump immensely. It angers me because the principle that we need to be able to prosecute former officials or current leaders when they actually commit crimes has never been more degraded by what this prosecutor in Manhattan is now doing. Democrats have to cheer it and support it because they're petrified that if they don't, Trump is going to get strengthened and he'll be even more likely to win. And so now we're going to have this incredibly egregious abuse of the criminal justice system for overtly political ends, where Democrats now try to do exactly that, which in 2016 they said was the sign of authoritarianism and fascism, namely trying to imprison your political opponent in lieu of beating them at the polls. It is everything the Democratic Party is. It shows everything that our elite media class is, which will absolutely be with the Democratic Party in cheering for this. And it shows that whatever you want to say about Trump, whatever you think he threatens, whatever you think he menaces, whatever values you think he undermines and degrades, the institutions of power aligned against him are vastly worse because they do believe in the Sam Harris principle. They just don't have the candor that Sam Harris has to admit it, namely that they will do anything and believe that anything is justified as long as the goal is to defeat Donald Trump and prevent him and his movement from regaining power democratically. That is who they are. There is no bigger threat to democracy than they. There are no worse enemies to all the values they claim to believe in than them, just like they and their media are the most aggressive spreaders of disinformation as they claim that they're protecting you from it. And on some level, as abusive and corrupt as this prosecution is, I do think it will end up shining even brighter light on just how corrupt our establishment is. And at the end of the day, ironically, there's nothing that helps Trump more and nothing that strengthens Trump more than when people see with their own eyes just how corrupt the bipartisan establishment in the United States is. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.